Welcome to the Health on Track podcast. Let's talk well-being.
Welcome to the Health on Track podcast, offering you a shot of wellness. I'm Hayley, the Member Engagement and PR Manager at GIG Golf, and I'm so excited for today's episode. We'll be talking about workplace connections, somewhere we spend a lot of time, probably more time than we do at home. So today is a very crucial topic as part of our everyday lives. Joining me today is the incredible Lucy Darbo, CEO of Together. Hi, Lucy.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. We are honoured. Together is a consultancy firm dedicated to workplace culture, focusing on three key areas: people, purpose, and culture. Lucy's been providing consulting services across the Middle East, Africa, and Europe since 1998. Lucy's a multi-award winning CEO, entrepreneur who knows what it means to build, manage, perform in the business world with culture at its core. How are you doing, Lucy? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, really good. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you. I mean, this is something that we need to discuss. This is something that every company needs to know about, company culture being its core. So could you, we all know the word culture.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean?
It's a great question, and thank you for asking it, because I think a lot of people do wonder, what is this mysterious thing that people describe as workplace culture? So in simple terms, it's the environment within which an organization operates, and that's made up of behaviors from the workforce, kind of key principles, shared values, and the common goal that people are working towards. So it's really a broad topic. And when people ask about it, quite a lot of people reference, there's this famous quote by Peter Drucker that says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And that gets used a lot. I'm kind of like not sure, because to me that sort of infers that one's more important than the other. So to simplify it, strategy is what we do. Culture is the how we do it. And that really, I feel like, is the easiest way to describe it. It's like how we do the day-to-day operations inside a business.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I think a lot of companies get bogged down with the strategy part and how are we going to do this and what does it look like? And so I love that quote. I'm going to be using that myself.
Thank you.
And in your opinion, what constitutes good and a bad company culture?
Yeah, I'm always really hesitant, I have to confess, to say whether something's good or bad, because I think it's a little bit more complex. Culture's so unique, and that's the joy in what I get to do every day, is see how completely unique and different every business is. And because of that uniqueness, it's like DNA, like literally, or like you and me. We have so many things the same, but we are entirely different when it comes to the little details. And that's the same as culture, really. So what we look for is, what's a really powerful culture? What's a really distinctive culture? And if you can get that right, you will see the output from an organizational point of view, which is why I believe culture is a business superpower, because if you can get it right, and that means a culture is meant to unify a workforce. It's about corralling everyone with shared values around a common belief system and working towards the same goal. If that's happening, that to me is successful. The key, though, is it's not for everyone. One size doesn't fit all. So a working environment that I might love and a work culture that absolutely stimulates me may not be the same as for you. And so therefore, being really distinctive about the culture means you also get to attract the type of people with the type of energy and passion for what you do, rather than just joining an organization because technically I can deliver the role.
Because the skills match.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because so what we're saying here is that actually a company, as well as thinking of the strategy first and foremost and what they are as a business, first and foremost when they're setting up, they should really be looking at the culture to attract staff. Because when you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, but what if that person doesn't align with the way that the company set that culture up? So what happens then? But what you said hit the nail on the head. That's why you set it up before.
Yeah.
That's why. So you're going to attract those people, because as you said, we can do the same role kind of, and if you've got that skill set, you can do it in multiple businesses. But it depends which one you're going to thrive in, and that's probably based on the culture. Would you think?
Absolutely, because technical capabilities can be matched. You know, if we think about going for an interview for a new job, you know, let's say we're going into an accounting role, there will be hundreds of accountants with the same technical, potentially similar experience. But what's going to be the difference between that individual coming in and giving their absolute best and what we would call kind of discretionary effort is that going over and above. And that's going to be someone who aligns their belief system with how the organization behaves and believes. And therefore, if that's in alignment and I'm inspired by the reason the organization exists and I believe in the purpose of what that business does, I'm coming to work. Even if I'm working hard, it's meaningful work because I feel like I'm contributing towards something more than just a transactional technical task. And that's really the game changer. And that's what delivers the performance. Because if you imagine an organization with 1,000 people, and you imagine all 1,000 people moving in one direction, and the sheer force and power of that is phenomenal, as opposed to 1,000 people who are all bumping into each other because one thinks the priority is this, one thinks that, someone's got friction with someone else. And that's when you see the impact on productivity.
Yeah. I had the vision of when you were saying about kind of everyone going in one direction. It was fishers.
Yeah.
In my head, I was thinking of fishers and how they all go in the group and they're all in one direction. They're going to get there faster because of the speed of everyone else. And that really resonated with me from kind of workplace culture. And so in regards to workplace culture, if there is someone within the team or a number of people within the team that aren't going in the same direction and they're trying to kind of zigzag across, what do you recommend from someone who's working with those individuals and how to kind of highlight it, how to speak to that person and kind of get them on board to the company's culture?
I think this is where leaders, and when I say leaders, I don't mean C-suite, I mean manager, line manager, even peer-to-peer, you know, people perceive leadership as this kind of only those sitting at the top. But actually, we all have the ability to be a leader within the context of where we are. And what that is about standing behind the values. And that's why we talk a lot about values, because the core pillar of a culture is around shared values, because those values are kind of what build the belief system. So if, for example, in an organization, one of the values is speed, that the theory there is that whenever we're doing a task, whenever we're making decisions, speed is a priority. And inevitably that will be linked to your strategy because you need to get where you're going really quickly. Mm-hmm. The important thing about speed is what does that really mean in an action and a behavior? So does it mean, we say speed, so it means I'm not going to bother writing an email to cross my T's and dot my I's. I'm just going to make the decision and not tell anyone and move to the next task. Now, probably not, because if you did that, you'd start to see that internally the wheels would start to fall off and you'd have complete chaos. So when we talk about values, it's like, what does speed mean for our organization? And what does that look like in action so that each individual has the kind of tools to be able to know what behavior is expected? And they become really helpful when you have to have difficult conversations. So for example, in the situation you were just explaining, if one of our values was care, then you'd be able to start the conversation with someone who is behaving at odds with the values and principles of the business and say, you know, with the value of care, I care about our relationship and our work. Mm-hmm. And I'm noticing some behaviors that are potentially making things a bit challenging for us as a team. How can we, you know, get this result in a different way? So it's also like a toolkit to help teams work better together, but also sometimes to help people realize it might not be the right place for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because I mean, you talk about probation period, and a lot of people think, okay, probation period is for the company to decide whether you're good enough. Now, I personally believe it's for both parties to believe whether the fit, whether the culture, whether everyone's happy, both employee and employer. So if someone was to start at a role, do you believe that from the interview stage that you should be looking at, so if someone was going for an interview, they should be looking at the company's culture, the company's values? And how would they at interview stage aside from checking a website where most people have their values, how can someone check that before joining or accepting an opportunity?
And I love this question because, to be honest, it's often the question I ask the C-suite in our first meeting if we're doing a culture transformation. And I always say, if you were interviewing somebody and they asked you to describe the culture in your organization, what would you say? And I ask them all to write it down individually. And then we stick it up on the wall and compare and contrast, because inevitably you'll see 10 different answers. And that's what's really important about culture at work. There's this theory that you just let it be and what will happen will happen. And that's not the case. Culture is intentional. It really has to be intentional. It's like having a really rare jewel that requires constant care and attention and, almost needs to be polished every day. It can't be, oh, we've got there, we don't need to do anything anymore. It just is constant and kind of ever evolving as you go through time. So that probation period, I think it starts well before. I think it's how you position your business in the market in order to attract people that already share values and are inspired by the purpose of your business. So how does that recruitment ad look like? Is it in line with the type of culture and environment that reflects inside the business? Because I think the biggest risk, I don't know if that's ever happened to you, where you've read up about a business and done exactly what you said, and you Google and Glassdoor and ask your friends, and then you arrive and it feels like you've come to a completely different place. And what you saw on the outside doesn't match what's on the inside. And I think for anyone out there looking for a role, those are the signals to look for, because really strong cultures have a real level of consistency. They do what they say they're going to do. It is what they say it is, and they're very confident to stand behind that, which sometimes means really dealing with difficult situations and taking big steps, actions that really stand behind what the business values. And sometimes that might be letting someone go. Sometimes that might be, tackling really difficult leadership conflict because it's not in line with the values of the business.
Yeah. I think that's great what you've said. And I think a lot of people will probably resonate with that at some point within their career. I think most people can say they've kind of thought the dream would be this, and unfortunately it was something else. And I think that's really good to know. And I think anyone that's looking, or even when they're working currently, to check the to look at the values and say, does everything that we're going through right now look and abide by our values? Does it all kind of sit in place? And if not, ask and speak to your leadership and say, this is what I thought was, can you explain to me how we put these into place and practice here at the organization?
Because often, talking about changing, or getting a new role, a lot of the time in bigger organizations, it's internal moves. So you might be applying for a role in a different department or a different function and doing kind of a vertical move within a much bigger organization. And you often see in those circumstances that functions or teams have kind of microcultures. So it's also really important to take that into consideration, because just because you're moving to a different department within the same business doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same. And I think that's often the case, that we're innately optimistic as humans, right? And so we think, oh, brilliant, I've had an opportunity, it's in the same organization, I love where I work, and kind of forget to look into that detail, suddenly land with a perceived promotion with a vertical move and have gone to a different department, and it's quite different.
Yeah.
And not necessarily what they thought they were going to get.
Yeah, that's so true. I think, I think, again, would you say that's a leadership style from the management within those different departments, or is it the people that are working there? So everyone's got different personalities. So you might have a really fun team that you work with, or maybe the promotion you get is everyone's really serious and boring. So for them personally, it might not actually be a cultural thing. Yeah. It might just be a perception thing. Is that the case, or?
I think what tends to happen, if you have microcultures, it means that the overall organizational culture is not being intentional and is probably not being, carefully cared for day to day. Because what we do in the absence of a distinct culture is create our own. because we're naturally hardwired to do that, right? We create tribes and smaller tribes, and we come together with our own beliefs. So, you know, we do that in our friendship circles. We kind of are drawn to people that share similar values, enjoy similar things. So it's no different, really, when you go to work. So if the organization isn't actively, you know, driving a culture and really bringing it to life, and the leaders aren't setting the tone, and it isn't consistently being reiterated, then people will just create their own version of it. And then it becomes very much down to go to that manager because their team's really, you know, really engaged and they're all working really hard. Don't go to that one.
Yeah.
Because they're not. And no one's enjoying it, and they're all writing emails going, I hate my job, which does happen.
That's so interesting. I think when you said about kind of you create your tribes, and it's because you resonate with people. So someone has that value and belief of something. So you're like, yeah, I believe that too, actually. So now we're together.
Yeah.
So together.
We do. We have a pun jar. I'm the worst for it, by the way. Every time we mention it, there's a lots of them. It pays for the end of month party.
How do workplace connections affect mental health?
Enormous. I mean, I think it's such a huge topic. Look, okay, I'll ask you, how long do you think you spend at work in your lifetime?
More than I spend at home.
Yeah, and
that's for sure.
It will blow your mind. So it's a third of your life, 90,000 hours. Blow your mind, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about that, it can be really rewarding and really fulfilling. And I think that's exactly right. What do you want from your professional experience? Given you've got 90,000 hours of it, which I know it blew my mind too. But that's why it's so important, because the reality is there are two versions of work. You know, hard work. I was asked about, statistics around the UAE being the hardest working in the region. And I find that really challenging, because I was like, I feel like I've always worked hard, but I don't think,
I am.
hard work is necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's about what brings you satisfaction, what's meaningful work, and what am I inspired to contribute to in a purpose that I want to be part of and follow. And when you tend to ask people about their best work experiences, it's not always, I work the shortest hours.
No.
It tends to more often than not be the quality of the work, the challenge, the motivation. But, it's not always all fun and happy. It's also, it was difficult, but we were in it together. People often will reference the team that they worked with, the challenges they overcome, what they learned, what they gained from that. So it didn't feel, on reflection, like it was the hardest working period of their life. They think of it very fondly. And that's principally the difference, right?
Yeah.
Choosing to be somewhere where you're with like-minded people that you can connect with has just so many benefits apart from anything else. It builds resilience. It's much better not only for our mental health, but our physical health, because the two are connected. So we have less stress, less anxiety, stronger resilience, more collaboration amongst teams, which builds for better retention. So, the benefits are endless, honestly. But we are hardwired, like I said earlier, to connect with people because we're social creatures. That's at the core of it. Yeah. So we will always want to connect. Where it's difficult, our organization's enabling those connections. And that becomes really challenging. We had a client not so long ago who categorically, at the C-suite level, said, I do not want to see the same people sitting at the lunch table together for more than one day, because otherwise they could be plotting and scheming. And I mean, this is the opposite of how
things like this.
Yeah. And the shame there is that person obviously was a very talented, skilled individual, but had a real fear about connections in the workforce hindering the organization. When in fact it's quite the opposite. It builds trust, builds loyalty, and going back to what I mentioned earlier, that discretionary effort.
People want to be there because their friends are there.
And they're in it together.
Yeah.
They're all working towards a common goal, and they are sharing that experience, and that's a very powerful connection to have.
Yeah. And they're going to build trust together as well, and projects that they're working on, they're going to have pride after, and they're going to be like, we did that. we did that together. Like that is our project now. So yeah, I completely, and talk about retention. So what, this is probably a topic you get asked a lot. How do you think workplace culture affects losing employees?
It's almost the number one reason, by the way.
Yeah.
And the numbers are terrifying. I think the Gallup workplace, the future, I'm going to get the name wrong now. The 2023 Gallup workplace study that only came out a couple of months ago said basically 49% of the Middle East workforce are looking for a job.
49.
So that's basically 1 in 2. So one of us, statistically, in our region is currently on the lookout, whether they are actively searching, but certainly looking for opportunities.
Wow.
So that's staggering. And a lot of that's connected to stress, what's happening within organizations, you know, how organizations are adapting to the changing world around us, and are they moving at the right pace? But it's absolutely critical. And I think statistically, we did a survey in the UAE, and 88% said that they would consider leaving their job because of workplace culture, a bad workplace culture or a toxic workplace culture. So it's a big driver now. And we see it the other way with interviews. In the top 2 questions asked by candidates is, you know, what's the culture like? Because it's a big drive around where a candidate will choose to go next.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. Do you think people are becoming more aware? So before, I do feel like 10, 20 years ago, people wouldn't have asked that kind of question. It would have been like, this is my technical skills.
Yeah.
I want the job. Let's go for that. And I think now people are more aware of how much it's affecting your mental health. So they're saying, actually, I need to know how this is, like, if I'm going to take this opportunity, what does that look like? How do I fit in with that as well? And personality wise, does personality have play a part in culture to different personalities?
I mean, yes and no, because everyone's an individual. So yes, principally that's at the core of every workforce is so dynamic and different. Again, it comes back to what's the thread that connects you all.
Yeah.
And if an organization has a really strong purpose that you can get the workforce behind, it doesn't really matter if one's an extrovert and one's an introvert. They are sharing this journey. And they know, you know, they're both wanting to contribute to it. So that doesn't affect it as much. But certainly to your point about it being more present now, absolutely. I mean, workplace culture is now one of the, as I said, the top 2 questions from interviewees, because I'm going to spend a third of my life working. I really need to know that I'm going to be in an environment that I choose. And I think that's really exciting. The workforce now have more power. You know, this dynamic, and I think particularly in the Middle East, where we're seeing a lot of change when it comes to all of the kind of legal parameters around visas, work visas, a lot of legislation around labour laws and what is possible and what's not. So all of these shifts are making that kind of dynamic much more level. So it's not anymore the employer holds all the power and the employee is just hoping to get the best possible package and go in. Now there is a real pushback. You know, employees and the workforce have a choice. We can choose where we go. We have more skin in the game, and that is definitely putting pressure on organizations to make change.
Yeah, I think I know a lot. There's large organizations that can pay the real massive monies, but I think people are waking up to that and they're saying, yes, I could get a package for X amount. However, I feel like I'm really worked to the bone.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be a good culture. So actually, I will take half of that salary and go to somewhere like this company where I know has very good values, very good culture. So yeah, interesting what you said about
And I had the most incredible story, because it's not just the workforce at C-suite, where we're talking lots of zeros. In the banking industry, there was at a C-suite level, you know, they're choosing to go with the role that has flexible working and hybrid.
Yeah.
And sacrificing several zeros and making that move. So it's at all levels. You know, I think we can often imagine that the C-suite live in their, you know, yes, in the golden cage, and none of this is impacting them. But we are seeing that behavior change for them too. So it's all the workforce. It's not just, you know, the more junior or the younger, because I think there's often a misconception that it's Gen Z, it's millennials. It's absolutely not. I think the largest age group during, you know, when we had that kind of big post-COVID Great Resignation, the largest number were in their 40s, 35 to 45 years old.
That's really interesting.
And everyone wanted to say it's the young ones, and it actually, it wasn't.
I think it was people waking up and going, actually, am I happy?
Yes.
Is this for me? Yeah, I think everyone had a true time of reflection over COVID. What are your top 3 tips on creating good working environment?
I'm going to be a bit cheeky. It's actually 4, is that okay?
Yes.
Well, because we love to use an acronym for that to keep it simple. So the acronym's CARE, because actually at the core of it, care is one of the most important things for an organisational perspective for a workforce. If we feel cared for, it's a game changer. And really, that stands for kind of, it's a nice acronym. C, celebrate. I think we never see enough celebrations, and, you know, we all work very hard. Milestones, moments matter, you know, celebrating the little wins and the big wins makes a big difference. And very quickly, it's sort of like a pay it forward, has that really strong ripple effect through the organization. A, activate. The biggest challenge we see is people have a culture, they have values, but they're on the wall or a piece of paper. Activate that culture, really keep working to bring it to life, make it real, not just, you know, a document or a sticker on a wall.
Because you have to.
Because you have to. Yeah. R is recognition. It comes out in all the survey work that we do, and we've probably surveyed in the last year about 5,000 of the workforce. The top 2 values they desire the most, recognition and engagement. Mm-hmm. Recognition is the most powerful tool to build engagement, and that's not money.
Yeah.
It's different ways to acknowledge people's work, just a thank you.
Just a quick.
At a base level. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, acknowledgement for what our contribution is has a huge impact. And last but not least, with E, empathize. Empathy is a really, really powerful tool, particularly when we think that we have diverse colleagues around, you know, from a geographical point of view, from an experience point of view, from a personality point of view, from a functional, a technical. Really spend time to put yourself in someone else's shoes, particularly as leaders, because all too often we make such big assumptions about everyone believing what we believe, and very rarely that's the case. And I think if you can do those 4 things, you're making great headway to shifting your culture.
I think we're out of time. I could speak about this all day with you, because there's some really great tips and insights that you've given, not just from kind of leadership level, but kind of the more junior levels, that we can actually have the choice and we can impact that culture as well ourselves. And we don't just have to be bound by kind of a negative working kind of company culture. We can actually make that change as well ourselves. So thank you so much for joining us. Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. So you guys are together. That's exactly what you do. You help with company culture, kind of implementation down to kind of actually kind of in the core of the workplace. So if anyone obviously needs any help with company culture, get in touch with Lucy and her team at Together. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Our next episode will discuss breast cancer symptoms, treatments, and early detection. Don't forget to tune in to our next episode. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and any platform you choose to stream from. Until next time, stay well and keep thriving. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much. Loved it.